Good morning. First, before I begin, I wish to thank the organizers, Professor Römer and Michael Burki, for inviting me and for the very kind and generous hospitality. My paper continues in a way and discusses precursors of the text that was just introduced by Professor Nelly Ziegler, but I will attack it from a different point of view. What I want to talk about in this paper are two works that were recovered from the late Bronze Age, archives at Ougarit and its little sister Emar, both sites located in modern-day Syria, and both sites whose names were made famous by French archaeologists and epigraphists. My aim here is to introduce two works copied by scribes in these ancient cities in order to discuss the theme of divine retribution in Mesopotamian literature, more specifically to consider Mesopotamian literary trends as a reaction to the idea of sin and divine punishment in the Old Babylonian period and in subsequent periods. The works I will discuss are The Righteous Sufferer and Enlil and Namzitara. The first work introduces the sufferer who seeks to understand the ways of the divine. This piece of literature is considered by some scholars, but not all, to be the literary precursor or urtext of the great wisdom composition we have just been introduced to, Ludlul Bel Nemeki, I Will Praise the Lord of Wisdom, a work which has been compared since its initial publication in the 19th century AD to the biblical book of Job. The second work I bring here is a short dialogue, dialogue-like wisdom composition between the god Enlil and a human protagonist, a person named Namzitara. I will show how the protagonist rejects the idea of divine retribution or reward for good deeds, and like Kohelet, claims it is of no avail. This interpretation of Enlil and Namzitara is the result of my recently published analysis of the work on the basis of manuscripts arriving from Ougarit and Emar. After introducing these works, I will also want to present the following argument as my conclusion. Previous scholarship, including biblical scholarship, has traced the historical development of the Mesopotamian approach to divine retribution, as articulated in, for and foremost, Babylonian wisdom literature. Basically, the common thesis, which is found again and again, is that during the Kassite period or Eastern II period, and throughout the first millennium, a counter-trend was introduced to critique Mesopotamian religious thought concerned with divine retribution. However, I will show that this is not the case. I am not saying something original here, but something which is already discussed in the Assyriological literature. I will very shortly argue on the basis of the two texts, of the two works I will discuss here, that antagonistic trends or critical views of divine retribution existed side by side, or contemporaneously with the traditional view of retribution found already during the Old Babylonian period and subsequently in the late Bronze Age and into the first millennium. We move to discuss the first text. I move to discuss the first text, The Righteous Sufferer from Ougarit. The composition The Righteous Sufferer was found in Ougarit, but it was not written by Ougaritic scribes. It needs to be stressed that it was composed in Akkadian, in Babylonia, sometime during the late or post-Old Babylonian period, and from there it was transmitted to Ougarit. Although in and of itself it is not properly speaking a wisdom composition, and it fits more comfortably with the genre of prayers, it introduces one of the chief concerns we find in Mesopotamian wisdom literature, namely the problem of divine retribution. It seeks to address a question which will be more fully articulated in the famous Kassite composition Ludlul Ben Nemeki. And this is the problem. Why does divine retribution fail? Why does the wicked prevail while the just fails? An attempt to answer this question is found in a group of Mesopotamian works that fall under the category of theodicy, or very basically said, in other words, how to reconcile between good and evil. These compositions try to provide an explanation of the working of divine retribution and its apparent contradiction, because suffering is due on the blameless as well. Let us read the composition. I read the entire text, although it is not fully preserved. So the beginning is broken, and so is the end. And you will see already the similarities with Ludlul, which we have been presented to before. Bad dreams kept besetting me at night. My omens became ever more troubling, changing like broken. The diviner could not determine the meaning of my oracle prognosis. The judge, this is the god Shamash, does not hand out my omen. My omens are confused, my extispacy totally senseless. The interpreter used up the incense for smoke omens. The diviner used up the lambs. The experts debated about my tablets concerned with the situation. This is not certain here. But they did not say or could not say when my illness will end. The family has assembled in order to mourn over me before my time. The kin by marriage was standing as gloom was imposed. My brothers were mournful, like the Mahu personnel bathed in their own blood. My sisters were pouring fine oil until the Lord lifted my head, and this is Marduk, reviving me from the dead, until Marduk, the Lord lifted my head, reviving me from the dead. I ate scarce bread, I drank as drink, blood and brine. At night, sleep would not overcome me. I was sleepless my entire night, and here it's a bit broken. I'm sick, and so on. I continue on the reverse, which troubled me. My tears are like food rations. Marduk must not be forgotten. Marduk is to be praised. Without Marduk, the breath of my mouth would have departed. Would not something broken? I praise the deeds of my Lord. The deeds of Marduk I praise. The deeds of even an angry God I praise. The deeds of even an offended goddesses I praise. Praise, so that you will not come to shame. Praise to Marduk, I pray to him. The one who struck me, but then was merciful to me. He held me back and bound me. He broke me and tore me. He shattered me and rendered me limp. He cast me aside, but picked me up again. He threw me down, but raised me up. He saved me from death's mouth. He raised me from the netherworld. He broke the weapons of my smiter. He took the spade from the hand who wished to bury me, from the hand of the one who wished to bury me. He opened my covered eyes. He set straight the speech of my mouth, my ears, and here the text breaks, but apparently the sufferer was saved and recovered. What do we see here? We find the speaker suffering. He is sick, and he seeks the help of professional diviners and experts. They, however, cannot assist him in resolving this problem. It seems that the god Shamash refuses to divulge the speaker's omens or potent signs. Being sick and without the knowledge of the cause of his sickness, because his omens are obscure, hence he is not armed with the necessary expiatory rites, the speaker stands on the edge of death. He offers Marduk praise, not forgetting to thank his own personal gods, and he is only saved, like in Ludlul, when Marduk intervenes. The solution that is presented here by the sufferer to the problem of suffering is to pray continuously for Marduk and unwaveringly trust in the God, which is as much as the same solution that Job advocates. We inexplicably suffer. The ways of the gods are not known. Salvation will come eventually with belief and prayer, I would say, in the Mesopotamian world. There is much debate over the question of whether or not the view expressed by the sufferer is a critique of the traditional understanding of divine retribution or just rewards, as expressed by the general dictum do ut des, I give in order that you will give back for me, the believer says to the God. For Van der Thurn, for the scholar Van der Thurn, unexpected suffering or unmerited pain called into question the whole equation of divine retribution. Likewise, for Jean Bottero, the sufferer experiences an inexplicable reversal of values, hence he exhibits a change from the conformist theology of his times. In the other camp are those who say that the purpose of the theodicy is not to contradict received wisdom, but rather reassert the value of the traditional dogma of divine retribution. For in spite of the skepticism expressed, in the end, the gods will work out things for the best. Obviously, this crux cannot be solved here, but it is to be emphasized that the articulation of the question of punishment and reward, as is found in Ludlul ben Nemeki of Kassite times, has its roots in the righteous sufferer from Ougarit, and also in other words, Sumerian as Akkadian, like the man and his god, and le Juste Souffrant, the Akkadian version of the same piece, which we can date to the Old Babylonian period. Hence, in short, divine retribution was critiqued, challenged, or problematized right from its first literate articulations. I now move to the second piece, and it concerns us because it introduces the so-called vanity theme, which will find articulation also in the works of the first millennium, like, for example, the Dialogue of Pessimism, where positive actions approved by the gods and hence rewarded under the scheme of divine retribution, rewarded in form of wealth, happiness, children, and so on, are wholesale rejected because they are futile. The story of Enlil and Namzitara itself is a bit of a folk tale, the narrative scheme. It tells of how the mortal Namzitara was walking hurriedly by when he met the god Enlil, who, however, was disguised as a crow. When asked by Enlil who he is, Namzitara sees through the god's disguise and names him. He does it by an elaborate pun, alluding to a lost Mesopotamian myth, punning on the way that Enlil is called in that myth and the word for raven in Sumerian. So the pun would have been lost for people who don't speak Sumerian. But anyway, he recognizes him, the god, and we pick up from this point, and I read. Namzitara says, "You are Enlil." Namzitara says, to which replies Enlil. Enlil speaks, "What is your name?" Namzitara is my name. Your fate will be decreed in accordance with your name. And here is also a sort of learned etymology, because the name of Namzitara means something like the life will be, or the fate will be, of life will be determined, will be set, will be fixed, and this is the meaning of his name. And so now, as his name, so his fate will be decreed in accordance with your name. And now the blessing of the god Enlil, for a reward of having recognized him, may it be that you will have silver, you will have lapis lazuli gems, you will have cattle, you will have sheep. And now Namzitara replies, "To where will I take your silver, your lapis lazuli gems, your sheep? The days of mankind are approaching. Day after day, so that is to say, life will diminish. Month after month, so it will diminish. Year after year, so it will diminish." It's me? Okay, I will continue, it doesn't matter. And another line only in the Ugaritic text, so it will diminish. Now 120 years, so will be the limit of mankind's life. And the number here, of course, was brought into attention because it also appears in Genesis as the limit, and Jacob Klein wrote about it, as the limit set upon the lifespan of man, 120 shanim. And 120 years, that will be the limit from that day till now, as long as mankind lived. I am going home, do not stop me, I am in a hurry. And there might be an allusion here that I am going home means I'm going to the netherworld. I'm going now, eventually I will die. The conclusion in the words of Namzitara is that the entire system of divine retribution, material rewards for good deeds, is to be rejected. Two themes are found in this work, although they are well known in other Old Babylonian, Sumerian literature wisdom compositions. The first is the rejection of material wealth, as Namzitara rejects Enlil gifts. This is found in a variety of Sumerian works, such as Lugal Banda and Anzu, or the Descent of Ishtar, where the gods offer gifts and then they are rejected for other sort of gifts. or rewards. The opposite notion is, of course, accepting divine favor, which materializes the traditional notion of do ut des. It is found, of course, throughout in many examples of Sumerian compositions. I just give an example in the following quote from a royal hymn. May you have property, may you have prosperous fate, may you have silver, may you have grain, which is a blessing very similar to the blessing of Enlil, which Namzitara rejected. The same idea is found many centuries later in the famous wisdom work, the Babylonian Theodicy. The friend replies to the sufferer, he who is attentive to his God will have good luck. The reverent one who worships the goddess will accumulate wealth. The second notion that we find in Enlil in Namzitara is the vanity theme, which advocates adopting a nihilistic attitude to life. But this is not unique to this composition only, as has been shown by Alster in The Wisdom of Sumer, his book which collects Sumerian wisdom composition. This view was exemplified by a few short Sumerian wisdom compositions, all including the following wording. The compositions are longer, I just bring the essence of them expressed in one line. Nothing is of value, only or but life is sweet, or in its sweetness. Let us conclude what happens in Enlil and Namzitara in light of what we discussed. First, we reject the gifts of God as a reward, hence we throw the entire basis of retribution. And secondly, we justify our deeds because, like Kohelet, we say that nothing matters. We are all going to die anyways. An extreme solution to the problem of divine retribution, that is for sure. Let me now move to my conclusion and closing words. Scholarship has described a progressive or evolutionary process in thinking about divine retribution in Mesopotamia. I simplify here for the sake of my argument. At the beginning were the Sumerians who accepted in a straight way and without questioning divine retribution. And in many works you find the Sumerians described or treated as if they are little children or something from the beginning of mankind. Yes, they are just babies. For example, in the myth of Lugalbanda, the hero Lugalbanda prays to the gods, they grant him what he wants, and then he makes a big sacrifice, invites all the gods in gratitude. Then came questions in the old Babylonian period when the troublesome Amorites arrived. These are the Semitics, always asking questions and making problems. And they wanted to ask questions about the contradictory nature of divine retribution. And finally, what is considered in many books, the Middle Ages of Mesopotamian history, so it is called, although it is not a fitting appellation, the Kassite period. In that period, skeptic, if not nihilistic, attitudes rejecting divine retribution of reward and punishment were introduced in works such as Ludlul ben Nameki, the Babylonian Theodicy, and the Dialogue of Pessimism. Whereas in the early Sumerian literature, so it was argued, mankind was punished or rewarded by the gods according to its sins or acceptable behavior, as exemplified in the flood myth, for example. In the Kassite period and in the first millennium, the individual, now being articulated more forcibly in literature because of allegedly social and historical consequences, started questioning the assumption that lay behind reward and punishment. Such a view was advocated, and I mention here only its chief proponents, by Torkel Jacobsen, Lambert, Alberts, van der Thun, all to different degrees and, of course, with different emphases. However, thinking of Mesopotamian divine retribution as an evolutionary or developmental process across time was, I suppose, and this is an assumption, it requires more research, it was influenced, among other factors that can be taken into account, by the understanding of the development of divine retribution as found in the Hebrew Bible. Their traditional scholarship has argued of a linear development from a collective sense of sin and punishment, as a few examples were shown here, through the rejection of collective and generational responsibility, for example, by the prophet Ezekiel, and eventually the very questioning of the basis of individual divine retribution in the late books of Kohelet and Job, works which are regarded as theodicies. Such a model, without judging its historical validity or merits, because this is the task of biblical scholars, and I cannot answer for that, was partly responsible, so one can assume, in the picture drawn above. However, such a progression of thought is without solid foundations. We can shortly say that theses or antitheses, or dogmas and counter-dogmas, as, for example, Van der Thun wishes to see it, are historical models that necessitate changes across times. Naturally, the ideas found in the Old Babylonian period became more developed in compositions of the end of the second millennium and in the first millennium, as the ways of expression became more sophisticated, and at the disposal of authors was a wider array of literary works stretching back for 1,000 of years. However, with the publication of materials from Ougarit and Römer, along with the better understanding of the Sumerian and Akkadian wisdom literature of the Old Babylonian period, we learned that conflicting or contrasting views were already present in the Old Babylonian composition, especially those that fall under the category of wisdom. The ancients were not little children. They had already understood that good deeds can be rewarded by the divine, but that God's will is difficult to understand as much it is to grasp the depth of the ocean, the vastness of the sky. And this is a trope that we find already in Sumerian literature. And it is echoed later on in the book of Job. תמצא תכלית, it came out garbled here. החוקר אלוה תמצא, אם עד תכלית שדי תמצא, גובה שמיים מה תפעל, עמוקה משאול מה תדע, ארוכה מארץ מידה ורחבה מיני ים. I brought the translation here, you can follow in the French. No, that's the next slide. The last one, I promise. A few days ago, I was about to leave for Paris from Tel Aviv to come to this colloque, but it was impossible to leave Israel. My flight was cancelled. On grève, I understand that this is a crucial word here. Shvita, the same route from Shabbat, no work. In Elad and the airport, everything was closed. Nobody leaves, nobody comes. Although I did not know what my sin was, like the righteous sufferer from Ougarit, I understood I sinned against the gods. I prayed to the great gods of the sky. I repented my sin. I even vowed to lose some weight and start jogging again. The gods smiled upon me, and I managed to arrive to Paris on the only flight leaving Israel that day. Divine retribution still works. Well, at least sometimes. Thank you.